The call for survival, 5 to 7 minute hook. The sky above was dark and filled with swirling clouds, heavy with the threat of an incoming storm. The ground beneath was cracked, shifting, and unstable. Strange, eerie sounds echoed from the jungle's depths, where the shadows hid untold dangers. This was the world known as the Deathworld, a place where survival was a constant battle. No one had ever truly conquered it. They could only survive within it. For the humans living here, survival was not a choice. It was a necessity. They had built their homes on the edge of the jungle, far from the dangerous creatures and violent storms that ruled this land. But even in the safety of their settlement, they could hear the roar of the predators, the growl of the beasts, and the constant rumble of the earth, as if the world itself was angry. It was a constant reminder of how fragile life was in this place. Among the humans, there was a small group preparing for something even more dangerous than they had faced before. The mission they were about to undertake could mean the difference between life and death. They were going into the jungle to retrieve a rare resource, one that could save their entire settlement from the impending disaster. The resource was buried deep within the heart of the jungle, and no one knew exactly where it was. But they had no choice. The jungles were alive with danger, and time was running out. Captain Maria Holt stood at the front of the group, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as she tightened her gloves. The wind had started to pick up, and the air was thick with the scent of something terrible coming. She had seen what the Deathworld was capable of before, but this time it felt different. There was something worse coming, something she couldn't explain. The storm wasn't the only threat to worry about. "We have to move quickly," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Once we're in, there's no turning back. The jungle won't let us go easily." Her team nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They were all used to the dangers of this planet, but even they felt the tension in the air. Each step they took would bring them closer to something they had only heard about in stories, the fabled heart of the jungle. Tom, the engineer, adjusted the pack on his back, his fingers trembling slightly. "What makes you so sure this time is different?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Maria didn't answer immediately. She looked out toward the jungle's edge, where the dense trees loomed like silent giants. There was a strange stillness in the air. It was almost as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. "I can feel it," she finally said. "Something's changing. The jungle. It's different now." She turned back to her team, who were already checking their gear, ensuring everything was ready for the journey ahead. If the mission was successful, they would have enough resources to protect their settlement for a while longer. If it failed, the Deathworld would swallow them whole. The team set off, walking through the edge of the jungle and into the thick, oppressive underbrush. It was hot, humid, and the air was thick with the buzz of unseen creatures. They moved carefully, with practiced steps, aware that at any moment a predator could emerge from the shadows, ready to strike. As they advanced, the ground beneath their feet became uneven, and the trees grew closer together, blocking out the little sunlight that managed to pierce the clouds. Maria motioned for the team to halt. The air had changed again, and a low growl echoed from deep within the jungle. It was the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the foliage. "Stay alert," Maria whispered. "This could be one of the larger predators. Stay quiet, and stay in formation." They crouched down, blending into the shadows, their hearts racing. The growl grew louder, closer. It was then that they saw it, a massive creature, its eyes glowing like twin orbs in the darkness, its claws sharp and deadly. It moved with terrifying speed, its body built for the hunt. It was bigger than anything they had encountered before. Maria held her breath. The creature paused, sniffing the air, as if sensing their presence. She signaled for her team to move back, but they were frozen in place, terrified by the sheer size and power of the beast. The creature's head snapped toward them, and in that instant, Maria knew they were no longer invisible. The hunt had begun. But just as the creature took a step toward them, A deafening roar echoed from deeper in the jungle. Another predator, even bigger and more terrifying than the first, charged into the clearing. The two beasts clashed in a violent frenzy, claws and teeth scraping against each other. As the jungle seemed to erupt into chaos, the humans took the chance, quickly retreating deeper into the jungle, hearts pounding. They knew that the Deathworld was alive in ways they couldn't fully understand. It was a world that cared little for their survival, a world that only gave them a chance to live if they were strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough. But as they moved away from the battle, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The jungle was becoming more aggressive, and the storms were getting worse. The Deathworld was calling for something. What it wanted, though, was still a mystery. As the team continued on their path, they could feel the weight of the jungle pressing down on them, threatening to close in from all sides. They had to find the resource and get back before they became part of the jungle's endless hunger. The call for survival had begun, and the jungle was waiting to see who would answer. The hidden threat. The sun barely pierced through the dense canopy above as Maria and her team continued deeper into the jungle. Every step felt heavier, every movement more cautious. The path had become less defined, swallowed by the wildness of the Deathworld. They were no longer just facing the known dangers of the jungle. Something far worse was lurking, waiting for them to make a mistake. The ground underfoot was soft and spongy, and the air thick with moisture, making each breath feel labored. But that wasn't what made Maria's heart race. It was the unsettling silence that had fallen over the jungle. The animals, once noisy and active, were gone. The usual sounds of the forest, chirps, roars, rustles, had ceased. "Something's wrong," whispered Tom, the engineer. He shifted nervously, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. "Where is everything?" Maria didn't reply right away. Her eyes scanned the dense jungle, but all she could see were the towering trees and the thick underbrush that seemed to close in tighter with every step they took. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't normal. Then it happened. The ground beneath them trembled, a low vibration that seemed to resonate deep in their bones. The hairs on the back of Maria's neck stood on end. This wasn't the usual rumble of the jungle. This was something different. "Move," she barked, urging the team to pick up the pace. But before they could react, the earth beneath them cracked open, and a massive, dark shape shot up from the ground. It was a creature unlike anything they had seen before. It was massive, its black, armored body almost blending with the dark earth. Its eyes glowed an eerie red, and its mouth was lined with jagged, sharp teeth that dripped with a venomous substance. The creature towered over them, its 6 massive legs pushing through the ground like pillars of destruction. It had been lying in wait, hidden under the earth, and now it was awake. Maria's instincts kicked in. "Get back," she shouted as the beast lunged forward, its claws swiping the air with terrifying speed. The team scattered, running in different directions, but the creature's movements were too fast. Its huge legs pounded the ground, and it lunged at one of the team members, a young scout named Kira. Before Maria could react, the beast was upon her. Kira screamed as the creature's claws grazed her leg, knocking her to the ground. The beast towered over her, ready to strike again. Without thinking, Maria grabbed her weapon, a plasma rifle, and aimed it at the creature's glowing eyes. The blast from the rifle hit its face, but the beast didn't flinch. It roared in fury, its body shaking from the impact, but not slowing down. "Kara," Maria shouted, running toward her fallen teammate. She knew they had to escape, but they couldn't leave anyone behind. The creature lunged again, its claws aiming for Maria, but she rolled to the side just in time. She didn't have much time to think. She grabbed Kara by the arm and pulled her up. "Run," Maria ordered, pushing Kara forward. The team scrambled to their feet, moving as fast as they could. But the creature wasn't done. It followed them, relentlessly, every step sending a shockwave through the earth. The jungle, which had been silent only moments before, now seemed alive with the sound of the beast's pursuit. The team ran, their hearts pounding in their chests, pushing through the thick underbrush. But it was clear they weren't going to outrun it. The creature was faster, stronger, and more relentless than anything they had ever faced. Just as Maria thought they were done for, a loud roar echoed through the jungle. The ground shook again, but this time, the source was different. Something else, something bigger, was coming. It was as if the jungle itself was responding to the creature's challenge. The beast stopped in its tracks, its head snapping to the side as if sensing the new threat. The team took advantage of the momentary distraction and bolted for cover behind a large tree. They huddled together, watching as the creature turned and sprinted toward the source of the new sound. From the shadows emerged a massive form, even larger than the creature that had been chasing them. This new beast was covered in thick, dark scales, and its eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence. It was a massive predator, but it wasn't chasing them. It was here to hunt the creature that had nearly killed them. The two beasts clashed in a violent battle, their roars echoing through the jungle. The sound was deafening, the jungle shaking under the weight of their battle. The team watched in stunned silence as the two monsters fought for dominance, knowing that neither would stop until one emerged victorious. "This is our chance," Maria whispered, her voice low. "We move now." While they're distracted, with the beasts fighting each other, Maria knew they had only a limited window to make their escape. But every second they delayed was another second the beasts could focus on them. They had no choice but to risk it. The team dashed through the underbrush, moving as quietly as they could, their hearts still racing. Behind them, the battle between the two monsters continued, but they couldn't afford to look back. They had to reach their goal, the precious resource buried deep in the jungle. But Maria knew something was off. The Deathworld was becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. Something had awakened deep within it, and she had a sinking feeling that it wasn't just the monsters they needed to worry about. The savage survival. The jungle had transformed. What had once seemed like a challenge now felt like an unyielding force, a force intent on devouring everything that dared step into its depths. The team had just barely escaped the clash of the two monstrous creatures, but the danger was far from over. The jungle, with its dense foliage and thick trees, now seemed like a maze designed to trap them. Maria's heart raced as she led the group forward, her mind working furiously. She had always known that surviving this death world wouldn't be easy, but the harshness of it was worse than any of them had anticipated. The battle between the two monsters had given them a temporary reprieve, but they couldn't rely on luck forever. "Keep moving," she commanded. Her voice was firm, but deep down, she knew they couldn't keep running forever. The jungle was alive with danger, and every turn could bring them face to face with something worse than what they had already encountered. "Do you think it's safe to rest?" Tom asked, his voice shaking with exhaustion. His face was pale from the close call earlier. He was one of the strongest of the group, but even he was showing signs of wear from the constant tension. Maria stopped for a moment and scanned the surroundings. There was no sign of immediate danger, but she knew better than to trust the calm. The jungle could change in an instant. "We'll keep moving for now. We're not out of the worst of it." The team nodded, understanding. They had no choice but to push forward. Hours passed. The thick foliage began to clear, revealing a steep cliffside that overlooked a vast valley. The team halted at the edge, their eyes scanning the landscape below. It was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. The valley was lush, almost tropical, but there was an eerie stillness to it, a quiet that felt unnatural in such a vibrant world. "That's where we need to go," Maria said, pointing to a small building far in the distance at the bottom of the valley. The building was old, abandoned, but it had the resources they needed. The life-saving technology buried within its walls could give them a chance to survive and complete their mission. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The valley was a wide open space, offering little cover. It was a risk, but it was the only option they had. Maria turned to face the group. "We're going to need to move fast. We'll take the valley in 2 groups. Tom, Kira, and I will go first. The rest of you wait for the signal before you follow." Kira, the scout, looked nervous, but she nodded. Understood. Before they could take another step, there was a sudden thunderous crash. The ground beneath them quaked, and the trees around them shook violently. Maria's blood ran cold as she realized the creature they had escaped earlier was back, and it was angrier than before. From the trees, a massive shape emerged, its red eyes glowing with malice. The creature was relentless, its every step sending shockwaves through the ground. Its claws scraped against the earth as it advanced toward them, its massive body blocking the only path forward. "We don't have time," Maria shouted. "Move now." Without another word, she and her team sprinted toward the valley, the creature hot on their heels. The ground beneath them was unstable, the cliffside crumbling with each step they took. The roar of the beast behind them spurred them forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were running out of time. Maria glanced back to see the creature closing in. It was faster than any of them had anticipated, its massive form slicing through the jungle like a blade. Every movement was a blur, every step a reminder of the destruction it could bring. "We need to cross the valley quickly," Maria called, her voice trained with the effort of running. As they neared the edge of the valley, the team split up, taking different routes to avoid the creature's line of sight. The ground was rocky and uneven, but they couldn't afford to slow down. One wrong step, and they would be trapped. The beast was closing in faster now, its claws scraping against the rocks, its roar deafening in the still air. They were almost there, almost at the safety of the valley floor, but the creature was right behind them. "Go! Go!" Maria yelled. The team pushed forward, their muscles burning, their lungs screaming for air. They could hear the creature's heavy footsteps behind them, its pursuit relentless. Just as they reached the valley floor, the ground beneath them trembled once more. The beast's roar echoed through the canyon, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. They dove into the valley, rolling into the safety of the thick underbrush just as the creature crashed into the rocks above them. For a moment, the jungle was silent again. The team huddled in the shadows, their hearts pounding, their breaths ragged. They had escaped, but only just. Maria's mind raced. They had made it this far, but they weren't safe yet. The jungle was full of secrets, full of threats that would keep coming, one after another. But Maria also knew something else. They had survived this far, against all odds, and they were stronger now. They had faced death, and they had endured. The Deathworld's wrath. The valley had offered a brief moment of reprieve, but the silence was quickly replaced with an unsettling tension. The team lay low in the dense underbrush, their bodies pressed flat against the ground, their breaths held in anticipation. The ground trembled faintly beneath them, a reminder that the Deathworld was far from a peaceful place. Maria's heart raced, but her mind remained focused. The creature they had barely escaped was still out there. And it wasn't alone. The jungle had a way of punishing the unwary, of sending its relentless guardians after anyone foolish enough to venture into its depths. But Maria had seen enough of this world to know that she couldn't waste time hiding forever. The group needed to keep moving if they wanted to survive. She glanced at her team, each of them huddled together, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Tom, Kira, and the others were doing their best to remain calm, but they were all feeling the weight of their situation. The Deathworld had a way of breaking people down, of turning even the most hardened soldiers into husks of their former selves. "We need to move," Maria whispered, her voice low but firm. "We can't stay here. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that we'll be found." Tom nodded, his eyes filled with determination. He was a good soldier, and he knew that survival meant keeping a cool head. "We need to get to that structure. If we can make it there, we'll be able to regroup and plan our next move." Maria's gaze hardened. The building they were heading toward was their only hope. The old structure, barely visible from the valley floor, was said to house ancient technology, an artifact from a long-lost civilization that could give them the tools they needed to survive and make it off this deadly planet. But getting there was the hard part. The team began to move cautiously, sticking close to the shadows and using the terrain to their advantage. Every sound, every rustle in the trees, made their hearts skip a beat. The jungle wasn't quiet for long. It was always alive, always moving. As they made their way across the valley, Maria's mind raced with the plan. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The beast that had chased them earlier wasn't the only threat they would face. The Deathworld was full of dangers, from massive predators to treacherous terrain. But there was something more pressing on her mind, a sense of urgency that she couldn't shake. "We need to be ready for anything," she said, her voice sharp with warning. "This jungle doesn't give second chances." The team nodded in agreement, their focus shifting to the path ahead. They had no choice but to keep moving forward, no matter how much the world seemed determined to stop them. The valley began to narrow, and the rocky landscape shifted. Steep cliffs on either side made it harder to find cover. Maria's mind kept calculating every risk. They would have to take the next stretch quickly. Time was running out. They had almost reached the halfway point of the valley when the ground beneath their feet suddenly cracked. It happened so fast that there was no time to react. Maria heard the sharp snap of branches as the ground shifted, and before anyone could move, the earth beneath them gave way. "Down!" she shouted, instinctively grabbing Kira's arm and pulling her back as the ground crumbled. The others scrambled for safety as rocks and debris cascaded into the gap that had suddenly appeared, swallowing everything in its path. Maria's heart skipped a beat as she scanned the surroundings. The cliffside had cracked open like an open wound, the jagged rocks forming a treacherous pit below. For a moment, the group was frozen, their path blocked by the sudden rift. "Everyone all right?" Maria asked, her voice tight with tension. "We're fine," Tom replied, panting slightly as he helped the others back to their feet. "But we need to move, now." Maria didn't hesitate. They had to stay one step ahead of the jungle. She turned toward the remaining path, now more narrow and treacherous, with fewer options for cover. If they didn't move quickly, they'd be sitting ducks for whatever was hunting them. As they continued, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The jungle was alive, the air thick with the scent of decay and death. Every movement felt like it was being tracked, every sound a signal for danger. There was something deeper in this world, something that wasn't content with simply killing its intruders. They reached a small ridge overlooking the valley and paused for a moment, taking in the view. The structure was still in sight, almost within reach. But Maria knew better than to assume anything was certain in this death world. The landscape seemed to shift with every step they took, and danger lurked around every corner. Suddenly, there was a distant roar. It wasn't the creature they had narrowly escaped, but something else. The ground trembled again, this time with a deep, bone-shaking resonance. Maria froze, every instinct screaming at her to move, but she couldn't. Not yet. "Something's coming," Kira whispered, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to hurry." Maria nodded grimly. They had no time to waste. The building that lay ahead might be their salvation, but it was also a beacon for all the dangers that lurked in this wild, hostile world. Every step closer to it meant more risks, more uncertainties. But Maria had no choice but to keep moving forward. The death world would never let them rest, and the only way to survive was to face its fury head-on. The raging storm. As they pressed forward, the air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. The thick jungle around them seemed to hold its breath, as though the entire planet had gone quiet in anticipation of something deadly. Maria's senses were on high alert. Her every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but the path ahead seemed clear. "We can't stop now," she said in a low voice, eyes darting from one side to the other. Stay close and keep moving. The tension among the group was palpable. Every footstep seemed to echo too loudly in the silent world, every crack of a twig beneath their feet too noticeable. There was no sound of the usual wildlife, no birds chirping, no rustling of leaves. The jungle seemed empty, and that silence made Maria's skin crawl. Suddenly, a deep guttural growl rumbled from behind them, shattering the stillness. The sound reverberated through the trees, sending a chill through their spines. It was the same beast from before, its growl a reminder that it was not far behind. "Run," Maria shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. Without hesitation, the group bolted forward, the jungle around them transforming into a blur of motion as they sprinted toward the structure that was their only hope of survival. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and tremble, the dense vegetation tangling around their legs as they fought to push forward. But the creature was relentless, its massive form emerging from the shadows just behind them. They could hear the heavy thud of its massive paws as it crashed through the underbrush, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Maria's mind raced. The structure was close now, but they wouldn't make it if they couldn't lose the beast. A low, primal roar filled the air as the creature let out a deafening cry, sending waves of terror through the group. It was gaining on them. There was no doubt now, if they didn't act fast, they would become its next meal. "Left," Maria shouted suddenly, veering off the path as she spotted a narrow gap in the trees. They had to take a risk. There was no time for hesitation. The others followed her lead, darting into the dense foliage to the left, hoping to outmaneuver the beast. The creature let out an enraged howl as it followed them, its growls growing louder with each passing second. Maria pushed forward, the adrenaline fueling her every step. They had to get to the structure, but she knew they weren't going to make it if they didn't shake off their predator. The jungle seemed to close in around them as they wove through the trees, ducking beneath low branches and scrambling over fallen logs. But the beast was still there, crashing through the undergrowth with a terrifying speed. Maria could feel it getting closer, its hot breath on the back of her neck. "We're almost there," Tom shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "Just a little further." They pushed forward with everything they had left, their bodies screaming for rest, but there was no time to stop. The sound of the beast's thunderous footsteps grew louder, and Maria knew that any second it could pounce. And then, just as they thought they were finished, they saw it, a small clearing ahead, with the structure they had been desperately seeking in the distance. The old building loomed over them, a faint silhouette against the darkened sky. It looked like an abandoned relic, forgotten by time, but to them, it was salvation. "Move, move, move," Maria yelled, urging the group to give everything they had left. They pushed harder, their legs burning, their lungs gasping for air. The creature's roars grew louder, but they were almost there. They just needed to reach the structure. The first of the group burst into the clearing, and Maria was close behind. But as soon as she entered the space, she realized something was wrong. There was no safe haven. The structure wasn't abandoned. It was a trap. There was no way to escape without being cornered. "Get inside," Maria shouted, her voice urgent. The team rushed toward the entrance, but Maria lingered for a moment longer, her gaze locking onto the dark jungle behind them. She could feel it, a presence in the shadows, watching them. Before anyone could react, the ground shook again. This time, it was not the creature's footsteps. The entire valley seemed to rumble beneath them as the storm clouds overhead finally broke. Suddenly, torrential rain began to fall, the sky unleashing a fury of water that drenched the entire valley in moments. But this wasn't just rain. It was the start of something far worse. The clouds swirled in the sky, a dark, ominous vortex forming above them. The Deathworld was reacting, and Maria felt it in her bones. The storm wasn't just a storm. It was a signal. Something was coming. Something far worse than the creature chasing them. Inside the structure, the team huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. They had reached safety, but they could feel the weight of the Deathworld bearing down on them. The beast was only the beginning, and whatever was about to come next, they weren't sure they were ready for it. But as the storm raged outside, one thing was clear. The real challenge was only just beginning. The rising darkness. The storm howled outside, a violent symphony of nature's fury that shook the very walls of the crumbling structure. Inside, the group huddled together, hearts racing, unsure whether the storm or the creature that had pursued them was the greater threat. Maria's mind raced, her thoughts filled with a growing sense of dread. The storm outside wasn't just a freak occurrence. It felt purposeful. "What's happening out there?" Tom whispered, his voice shaking. Maria glanced toward the entrance, her eyes scanning the heavy rain pouring down in torrents. The landscape outside had turned into a blur, obscured by the raging tempest. But what truly caught her attention wasn't the storm. It was the unnatural stillness that had settled in the air. Despite the chaos of the weather, everything had gone eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a low, rumbling sound echoed from deep within the jungle. It wasn't the growl of the creature that had chased them. This sound was far deeper, more resonant, almost like a distant roar of something far larger and more dangerous. "It's not just the beast," Maria muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "There's something else out there, something we're not prepared for." The team exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. The sound was growing louder, a deep hum that reverberated through the ground beneath their feet. The very earth seemed to pulse, as if alive with a power they couldn't begin to comprehend. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every moment felt like a countdown to something terrible. "We need to get out of here," Maria said, her voice low and urgent. "That sound, it's not just the storm. It's the planet reacting to something." "But where do we go?" Tom asked, his voice cracking with fear. "The jungle is crawling with dangers, and that thing is still out there." "I don't know," Maria admitted, gripping her rifle tightly. "But we can't stay here. Whatever that sound is, it's getting closer. We need to move." The group gathered their gear, their movements quick and frantic. They knew they had no time to waste. Whatever was coming, they wouldn't survive if they stayed in this structure. The building, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a tomb. Outside, the storm raged harder, the winds howling like banshees as they pushed through the jungle. The rain fell in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But it wasn't the storm that held their attention now. It was the unnatural energy in the air, the feeling that something was closing in on them. Then, just as Maria thought they might be able to outrun whatever was hunting them, the ground shook violently. The tremors were so intense that the group stumbled, struggling to keep their footing on the slick, mud-covered ground. The air crackled with an unfamiliar energy, and in the distance, a dark shape began to emerge from the storm. "What the hell is that?" Tom gasped, his voice filled with disbelief. At first, it was a blur barely visible through the sheets of rain and fog. But as it drew closer, the shape became clearer, taller than any creature they had encountered before, its silhouette dark against the storm-lit sky. It was massive, larger than even the Deathworld beast, and its presence sent a chill down their spines. Maria's heart raced as she took in the towering form. It wasn't a creature, it was something else. A machine. A structure. She couldn't be sure, but it was moving toward them with an unmistakable purpose. "What is it?" someone asked, barely above a whisper. Maria shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to move. Now." The group started running, their legs aching with exhaustion as they pushed through the dense jungle. The rain soaked them to the bone, and the thunderous footsteps of whatever was following them grew louder by the second. It wasn't the creature anymore. It was something far worse, something that wasn't even alive. The storm seemed to intensify as they sprinted, as if the planet itself was rejecting their presence. The thick vegetation fought against them, vines and branches tearing at their skin, as if nature itself had turned against them. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Whatever was coming, they knew they had to stay ahead of it. As they raced toward a nearby ridge, Maria's thoughts flickered back to the words of their briefing. Survival is the only goal. The planet is alive. It reacts to threats in ways you cannot predict. But no one had ever warned them about something like this. They reached the ridge, breathless, eyes scanning the horizon. And then they saw it, standing in the distance, looming over the jungle like a dark god, its silhouette jagged and massive. It was a ship, or at least something that resembled one. But it wasn't like any ship they had ever seen. It was ancient, its surface scared and dark, its form unlike any technology the human race had ever encountered. And as it began to move toward them, they realized with growing horror that they weren't running from a creature anymore. They were running from something far, far worse. The ship was no longer a distant figure. It was almost upon them. Maria felt a knot form in her stomach. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't friendly. It was here to claim the final stand. The air was thick with tension as Maria and her team crouched behind the rocks at the edge of the ridge. They were breathless, their hearts pounding, eyes locked on the massive ship that now loomed just ahead of them. It had emerged from the storm, its form dark and imposing against the backdrop of rain and lightning. Every instinct told Maria that they weren't facing just any enemy. They were up against something much older, much more powerful, something that had been waiting for them. "We can't outrun it," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. His face was pale, and his eyes reflected the terror they all felt. Maria nodded grimly. The ship was too close now, and the landscape offered little in the way of escape. It seemed to know where they were, moving in their direction with an almost predatory certainty. She felt the weight of the moment settle on her chest. This was it, the last fight. Her mind raced. She wasn't sure what they were up against, whether this ship was a weapon, a transport, or something else entirely. But one thing was clear: they couldn't survive unless they fought back. "Everyone, listen to me," Maria said, her voice firm, cutting through the panic. "We don't know what that thing is, but it's not here to help us. We have one chance to survive. We fight. We make it count." They all exchanged nervous glances, but there was no time to argue. Whatever was coming for them, it wasn't going to stop until it had finished its purpose. The ship was now close enough for the team to see the details. It had a sleek, black surface, unlike any technology they had encountered before. There were no visible weapons, no obvious means of defense. But Maria could sense the power radiating from it. She wasn't sure how, but the ship felt alive, like it had a will of its own. "Any ideas?" Marcus asked, clutching his weapon tightly. The fear was evident in his eyes, but so was the resolve. They had made it this far. They weren't going to die without a fight. Maria scanned the area, her mind calculating the best course of action. There were no weapons in sight, nothing that could directly counter the ship. But she remembered the storm, how it had grown fiercer the closer the ship had come. Was the ship causing it? And if it was, could they use that to their advantage? "We can't fight it directly," Maria said. "But the storm, it's not natural. If we can find a way to use it, maybe we can disrupt whatever this ship is doing." The idea was risky, but it was the only one they had. The storm had grown in intensity with the ship's approach, and if the ship was manipulating the weather, perhaps they could turn the elements against it. But how? Maria's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the ground beneath their feet. The rocks were slick from the rain, and the air was thick with electricity. The storm was building, and the ship was coming closer. She could feel the pressure building in her chest, as if the very air was about to snap. "Okay, we move on my mark," Maria said, her voice low. "We need to find high ground, somewhere we can get close enough to the ship. The storm, whatever it is, it might be our only chance." The team nodded in unison, understanding the stakes. They'd moved swiftly, pushing through the rain and the thick vegetation, their every step quick and purposeful. The ship loomed closer, its shadow darkening the landscape. As they neared a small rise in the ground, Maria saw something in the distance, a high rock formation. If they could get there, they could have a better view of the ship and maybe even a shot at disabling whatever control it had over the storm. "Let's go," Maria shouted, breaking into a sprint. The team followed, each of them running with everything they had left. They reached the rise just as the ship descended, its massive form hovering just above the ground. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the air, and the storm intensified even more. Maria's breath came in ragged gasps as they made it to the top of the rise. She scanned the ship's movements, trying to make sense of what it was doing. It wasn't attacking yet, but it was preparing something. She could feel it. This was the moment. "Marcus," Maria said, turning to him. "You see that array of lights on the side? I think they're powering up for something." Marcus squinted through the rain, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, I see it. But how do we stop it?" "By giving it a taste of its own medicine," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "If we can short-circuit those power lines, we might be able to disable its systems. The storm is feeding it, but maybe we can turn it against it." Without another word, they moved forward, creeping through the wet terrain, trying to stay hidden from the ship's sensors. Every step felt like a race against time. The ship was getting closer to full power, and soon it would be too late. As they approached the ship's perimeter, Maria felt the electric charge in the air. The storm was alive now, the winds howling and lightning crackling, but Maria couldn't afford to be distracted by the storm's fury. They had one shot. Marcus and the others took their positions, and Maria reached for a nearby rock, lifting it with all her strength. She hurled it toward the ship's exposed power array. The rock hit the ship's surface with a violent crash, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The lights on the ship flickered, and the hum of its engine sputtered.